Ladies and gentlemen, that was the giant gong of Kyoto that you just heard, out of the mystic lore of the Orient. When it rings, things of utmost importance are about to happen, as they do in the story I'm about to tell you. The fabulous story of Townsend Harris, first white man to open up the Orient, and of the beautiful geisha who was sent to love him and kill him.
97X. Bam! The future of rock and roll. 97X. Bam! The future of rock and roll. 97X. Bam! The future of rock and roll.
Ray, enough already.
Laxative type music from Bryan Adams. It's available to you right now as part of the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves soundtrack. You'll have to wait till the beginning of September for an entire brand new album from Bryan Adams. But it's on the way, so fear not. Adam Heads.
And here's some other changes. Most of you guys had finals this week? Later. They're history. They're canceled. The legal drinking age is now 10, but you will need ID, let's be real. I'll be taking requests from all you teenage comet zombies on the hit line.
Nice recording.
Go again. I found a way to cook.
Take two.
I found a way to cook extra. Come on over and try my crispy. It's entirely different, and yet it's just as tender and tasty. No, and it's just as finger-licking good. You see, I found a way to cook chicken deep down and get that real crispy crust that some folks like. And it's just as tender and juicy. I'll get it now. I found a way to cook chicken deep down and get that crispy, that real crispy chicken crust. Yet it's entirely different.
This will be Wild Lines 30. Take one.
Now you have two kinds of Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Start again.
You say cut it.
Go ahead.
And now you have two kinds of Kentucky Fried Chicken to choose from. Yet tender and juicy. Is that it? Yeah.
That's all right, cut it.
It's better.
Take two.
Colonel, if you read it. Okay, we're recording.
Now you have two kinds of Kentucky Fried Chicken to choose from. My regular recipe.
Take three.
It's entirely different. Whatever, but now you have two kinds of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Let me get that scratched off of there and quit looking at it.
Quiet, please.
That real crusty, what kind of damn crispy crust. It's really different. Now you can have two kinds of Kentucky Fried Chicken to choose from. My regular recipe and my new extra crisp.
Crispy.
You extra crispy. I thought I said that.
1, 2.
Now you have two kinds of Kentucky Fried Chicken to choose from. It's entirely different. Yet every bit is finger-licking good, you see. Every bit of it's finger-licking good. You see, I found a way to cook chicken deep down to get that real crispy crust some folks like. I better do that again, huh?
Yes.
All right. Cut. You don't want me to sing, do you, for Christ's sake?
We're rolling. This is the good one. Take 5.
Most folks,
All right, once again.
most folks have heard about.
All right, that's good. Good, very nice.
That's why folks call it finger. That's why folks call it finger.
Sounds good.
That's why folks call it finger licking good. That's why folks call it. That's why folks call it finger licking good. That's why folks call it finger licking good. I'm not getting anywhere with this damn thing.
Okay, fine.
Welcome back to a fresh episode of Doing It. with Mike Sachs. Spring is in the air, is it not? Or is that the litter for my 300 guinea pigs? I always confuse the two. We have a couple of great interviews this episode, so let's get right to it because you are doing it with me. That would be Mike Sachs. 2 interviews for you today. In the first, I talk with the comedy writer, Michael Jamin. How great a name is that? Michael's a really interesting guy, very nice guy with an incredible CV. We're talking having written for King of the Hill, Wilfred, Just Shoot Me, Marin, Rules of Engagement, and others. He's what you might call in baseball a utility player, someone with great talent who can fit in anywhere and who has a good long career for a reason. He's incredibly talented and he's very easy to deal with. I always tell young writers, my advice for you is just to be easy to deal with. Don't be an asshole. And Michael certainly is not an asshole. Michael has a huge social media following and has a great video series in which he answers questions about writing for television. How to get an agent, what to do in order to achieve success, what not to do, which is probably more important than what to do. And I highly recommend that you check this out if you want to get into television writing. He's just one of those rare writers who can talk about his craft and the business without sounding like a disinterested, smug asshole. Recently, Michael wrote and self-published a book called A Paper Orchestra, which is a collected series of essays written in a style reminiscent, at least to me, of Gene Shepard, one of my favorites, among others. They're personal essays, and what I like about them, among other things, is that even though they're influenced by David Sedaris' work, you can't really tell that. It's not a copy. It's its own thing. It has its own style. The marketing copy for the book compares it to the work of Neil Simon, which I can't really see beyond the Jewish aspect and growing up themes, but it's a book that I really enjoyed. And what impressed me is that the writing for the page of what Michael is now doing is entirely different than writing for the screen, whether it's TV or the movie. It's a different set of tools. And I've seen a lot of stand-ups attempt writing books, and screenwriters attempt it. Most recently, David Mamet, who's written more than a few books, but his most recent book is really awful. And one can usually tell that it's a different ballgame and that the tools that made them a success in their own medium isn't necessarily translating to the medium of the written page. It's just different. It always reminds me of the musician Wynton Marsalis, who once said that to switch gears from playing jazz to classical, it would take him months. He had to retrain himself. It was a different set of tools. And this is a world-class musician. So writing for the page is so specific a skill that it typically takes a writer a few tries to get it right. And Michael seems to have nailed it with his first attempt, which is very impressive. And it says something a lot about him as a writer and about his skill set. Michael is someone who has what seems to be the dream job for so many, writing comedy for television. But he's always incredibly honest about how difficult this is as a career. Writing for TV has always fascinated me. When I first began, I wanted to write for TV. That was my goal. But that slowly faded out as I fell in love with writing for print and also being by myself. The thought now of being in a room with 10 to 15 other writers seems like hell to me. When I was in my 20s, it would have seemed like heaven. Not now. I've aged out, I suppose. But writing for print became a good fit for me. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask Michael about. How difficult is it to age as a comedy writer? And Michael is not old in the least. He's only 54. But in TV and in the comedy world, it could be a detriment. There are good aspects to writing for television and not so good. And Michael gives the down low with no bullshit, straight ahead, great advice. Here is my interview now with Michael Jamin. So many people, myself included, grew up wanting to write for television, late night or sitcoms. A huge fan of comedy. And we would read about SNL, the classic rooms, your show of shows going back, The Simpsons. Yeah. And it just seemed like a great occupation to have. So you have a terrific series of advice videos that you give answering questions from people who want to get into the business. What was it about TV that interested you enough to go into it?
Yeah, like you, as a kid, I just wanted to write television. I remember watching Cheers and thinking, how do I write I wanted to write Norm. How do I write the jokes for Norm? Not that I know how to do it. And obviously that's not even how it works. But, and then I remember even in college, I guess I saw an article. It might have been in something like Vanity Fair or something like that, where it was about writers' rooms and how they worked. And I was like, wait a minute, there are people who actually do this? Like, didn't occur to me that there were actually writers. And so, and then you could make a living.
I'm assuming, like me, didn't know of any writers growing up, or didn't even know of anyone who knew of any writers.
No, I had no contact, no connections. I knew of no one. So it was all brand new. But so after college, I just drove to L.A. to chase my fortune.
That is a ballsy thing to do. A lot of people, myself included, just talked about it. I ended up staying in New Orleans and D.C. and eventually moving to New York. But to get to get in a car and to actually drive out there, it's sort of a naive move, but it's also what one has to do, I'd imagine.
Well, it was also, what made it really hard was that I had friends coming out of college that already had jobs, that they were making money, or they're planning to go to med school or law school. Like they had a plan. Mm-hmm. And my plan just seemed dumb.
Yeah.
And so that was the ballsy part, not the long drives.
I tell people that. I mean, you sort of, and I myself included here, you're sort of free floating in space alone. You're off the beaten path. Your friends are going into business or to school or to journalism or to this and to that. And you're just sort of sitting at home alone, not knowing what's going on. But I think to achieve any sort of success, you do have to sort of get off the path and take that alternate route, which can be very frightening.
Well, yeah. And remember in the beginning, like success for me was being a production assistant on TV shows. Like I got a couple of jobs. That was a big deal. And so now success was making $350 a week, making coffee for people and going on runs. And I'm like, dude, I have an education, and it just felt like, what am I doing? So
well, not just an education, but a Princeton education.
I have a Princeton education. I'm throwing down the toilet. That's the plan.
But looking back, don't you think that's the best way to do it? Just jump in? I mean, what would have been an alternate route for you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, no, I don't have any regrets. It just seems, at the time, like those are the hardest years for me, those years right after college where I was just struggling. And I wrote a little bit about that in my book, but those were the hardest years. But what else do you, that's when you do it, when you're young, when you don't have any obligations and, you don't have a family and you don't, your bills are, I slept on, like my furniture was like I slept on a futon and I had a milk crate as a nightstand. Like I had no money.
Yeah. But I see that a lot with people writing in, asking advice, and you're very kind about it. But, if someone's in their 50s, say, and retiring from another job and they want to get into TV writing, your point was it will be very difficult, not only logistically, but also physically, because this is a job that requires you to work very hard. And when you start off, not for much money.
Oh, yeah. And even now, when I think about, my next TV gig, I'm like, oh, God, I'm going to have to work so late.
Yeah, right.
One thing when you're 25, but when you're older, it's harder.
Well, let's talk about that, because when one writes books, you don't have to be a certain age necessarily. You can work out of your home and do it on your own time. Well, how does age play a factor when you write for TV, especially comedy writing?
I had my friend John Collier on my podcast last week. And so he was I wrote with him on King of the Hill, and then he went on to become the showrunner of Monk. Was it Monk? No, it was Bones. He wrote on Monk, but then ran Bones. And I asked him kind of the same question, and he was like, he figured as a comedy writer, his expiration date was 45 years old, but he made it years past that, and every year past that was like a bonus. It's Hollywood favors youth, that's for sure. That's the last. They can still discriminate against that without getting shit from people. But it favors youth, but also the young have entered. Like I worked on shows where we were working till 4 a.m.
Yeah.
You know, when you're young, you can do that.
I'm friendly with Adam Resnick, and he was talking about his experience on a few of the shows he worked on, including Get a Life. And he said, and he was young at the time, but he said, I've just felt that I didn't want to be in an office ordering styrofoam dinners at 11 o'clock at night. It's just not what I wanted to do. And it never really, because when you hear about these stories of these classic writers' room, it sounds almost magical, but the reality of it can be quite, I would imagine, grueling.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think you said it perfectly. It is magical at times, and it's also grueling. Like, I remember on Just Shoot Me, driving home after work, listening to Howard Stern, listening to the live feed from New York, that's not what we do. It was like because I was driving home at like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Like that. We're used to listening to the feed at like the repeat feed in LA.
All right, so let's jump back a little bit. So you went from being a production assistant, and then how did you make that seemingly impossible leap from what you were doing to actually writing jokes for a show?
My job was I was a production assistant on a couple of shows. At one point, I was the assistant for 2 executive producers. They were showrunners of a couple of shows. They went up, and then they left them to do something else. And then they wound up becoming showrunners of Lois and Clark. And I returned. I said, "Hey, can I pitch you an episode idea?" So my partner and I came up with ideas. We sold, we pitched 5. They bought 1. They rewrote it heavily, and it became the second highest episode of Lois and Clark ever. But then after that, it was about getting, we had to get an agent, and then our agent managed to get us into a pile of scripts of a brand new pilot. And our script was read by Steve Levitan's assistant. So it was a young woman. She was probably 26 or whatever. And she read our script. She liked it. She passed it up to her boss, and he hired us.
Can you explain who Steve Levitan is to the listeners?
Yeah. So he was the creator and executive producer of Just Shoot Me. And then he would later co-create Modern Family.
Which is just, I think it's a masterpiece of a show. I'm not even I'm not anymore a fan of sitcoms that much, but my daughter is. And we've watched every one of those episodes multiple times. And just the amount of fat on those is 0. It's just perfection.
Yeah. And that's also with Chris Lloyd, who co-created it. And I worked for Chris Lloyd on a show called Out of Practice. And he's, those two are among the 2 best comedy writers in Hollywood. So that's why that show is so good.
Now, you sort of made it at an offhand comment. You got an agent. Now, you write about this in the book, and we'll talk about the book soon. But what is it that you recommend doing to get an agent, and what is it you recommend not doing?
Well, the thing is, when I broke it, the game has changed a lot in 30 years. That's how long it's been since I've been doing it almost. So, back then there was a path, and you would hopefully start off as a production assistant on a show. And if you were like within 10 feet of the job that you wanted, an agent might take a chance on you because, they would suspect that maybe you would get the bump up to staff writer. And that's how I got signed. And but it's a little different now. Now the barrier to entry to do anything in television, the barrier to entry is much lower. It's more democratized because of social media. I think it's easier to break in, but it's harder to make a living. So getting an agent now, you can do it. Hey, I got a YouTube channel with 100 million people. That'll get you an agent. So,
right, which didn't exist before. Now, if someone is out there publishing on McSweeney's, publishing on various comedy sites online, can you use that as a pathway to be discovered and get a television agent, or do you have to write scripts for television?
Today, it's not so much. I think it's not so much about your talent. It's what else can you bring to the table, and talent is certainly important. But if you can show that talent by, hey, I made this short that got a lot of views. Like, for example, I was a few years back, my writing partner were brought in by Warner Brothers. They discovered this young woman who created a series, on YouTube, a YouTube channel. And she and her partner made, maybe a dozen or so 5 or 10 minute, like little mini episodes. And some were really good. and some were not that good. And some got like 1 million views and some that didn't get 1 million views. But they discovered her and they brought us in to see if we would create a show for her.
All right. So how did it work out in that specific case? See, I'm interested in, when I first started off, I always thought that writing for print, which is the only thing I could do because I didn't know anyone, would be a gateway to TV writing, that I would be discovered like a minor league baseball player and then pulled up to the majors. So how did it work out in this specific case where you're talking about you were brought on as experts and veterans to help this talented person who maybe didn't have much experience? Did it work out in that case?
Well, we met with her and we told her, listen, if we were to take on, I was on the fence about doing this job. My partner, I think, was a little more interested, but we had a meeting and we said, listen, if we were to do this as a TV show, we would have to make the following changes. And I understand you might be very close to this and you may not want to make any of those changes. And so I certainly, if you don't feel good about this, then we're not the people to go with, because this is what we would need to do. And we told her what those changes would be. And she goes, no, I like that. She's like, okay, great. And then, we told the producers, hey, we're going to move ahead with this. And everything was a go. And then after about a month, I kind of forgot about it because, we're doing all this stuff. After a month, I was like, hey, whatever would have happened with that project we were going to do? And I reached out to the producer. I said, we haven't gotten paperwork. I was expecting we'd get some kind of, something going on. Then they said, Deb, the deal fell through because when they were negotiating with the studio, they got a little too greedy, and the studio decided they were just they were going to be a pain in the ass, and they killed the whole thing. It's like, oh God,
who got too greedy? The young woman or her agents or her representation?
No, the young woman and her partner. I think they wanted too much. They wanted too much control, and it wasn't like we didn't have a problem. It was the studio was like, go away. The problem is, when you're starting off, you literally have zero leverage, and so everyone. I always find this so fascinating. People would give their left arm to break into Hollywood. I'll do it for free. But the minute you put a contract in front of them, that's not enough. It's like, well, what are you talking about?
That's so true. And the same goes for print. I once had someone ask me advice, and he actually got into the New Yorker for the short little pieces in the beginning of the publication. And an editor came back with suggestions, and he said, what should I do? I said, take every single suggestion that editor has made for you and accept it gracefully. And he didn't do that. And he complained, and he never got asked back again.
My words.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that I tell younger students. They are not taught this in writing class. There's a whole list of things that I think should be taught in writing courses, whether it's in college or after class. It's never taught. And I was wondering, from a TV writing standpoint, you've had a tremendous amount of experience, and you hear a lot of stories about people breaking in.
I got lucky. I found a really good writing partner, and the two of us together kind of figured it out. The most important skill set that you'll ever learn is how to break a story. And I remember being on Just Shoot Me. You pitch ideas, I'd pitch ideas, and it'd be met with polite, oh, that's nice, right? And then someone else would pitch an idea, and everyone would roar, and then we would do that idea, including me. I think that was a great idea too. But it was like a magic trick. Like, how do you know? How do you know what's good and what's bad? And that just takes years of being in the room and kind of knowing. And I think this happens a lot now with young writers that I'm with. They'll pitch an idea and it'll be met with silence, and they think that like they're being maybe either discriminated against and stuff. Like, no one's taking me seriously. It's like, no, because your ideas suck, because it takes you 10 or 15 years to know how to do this.
Yeah.
That's the issue. So, there's so much to learn, and you're never done learning as a writer. But in the beginning, I was hanging on by my fingernails.
Well,
but at least I knew what
that.
was.
Well, I mean, I've written a few scripts, and I've found it to be fiendishly difficult. I mean, so difficult, to the point where I could even watch a movie and then knowing all the characters and knowing some of the dialogue and knowing all the plot points, I still really wouldn't be able to write it. So what were you doing when you were first starting off as far as pitching plot points that didn't work? And what were the other more veteran writers doing that did work?
Well, it's not on plot, but I remember one piece of advice I got from on Just Shoot Me from Marsh McCall, who's now passed away, but he was at the time, he had just left Conan as the head writer. And so Just Shoot Me the writing staff was hilarious. Like everyone was so experienced. And we would come in on a Monday and people would talk about what movies they saw over the weekend. And someone would say, like I remember Stephen Engel would say, here's how I would fix that movie, right? And then we would talk about it. And everything you were saying, I was like, "Oh my God, you're exactly right. That's brilliant. That would make it better." And I was so interested by the way they analyzed things. But the advice that Marsh McCall gave me, we'd be pitching a joke, and the room would come alive with people just slamming jokes everywhere, and I'm too busy laughing to even pitch because like this is hilarious. But after a couple of weeks of this, I'm thinking I'm going to get fired. I'm not here to. They're not paying me to laugh. I gotta contribute. And so I went, it was after work and I stopped by Marsh's office and I leaned in and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And I kind of confided to him. I was like, I don't know how to beat everyone here. Everyone's so fast. How do I beat them to the joke? He said, you don't. If they have a joke, if we're all pitching on one joke, you're never going to beat these people because they're too fast. But so you have to find a different way to access that joke. You got to go around. And like the analogy I think of is, like if you're like to do an Easter egg hunt on someone's lawn, and I know you live in Brooklyn, so you don't know what a lawn is, but it's like grass in front of a house.
Mm.
The obvious place to look for Easter eggs when they yell "go" is like in the bushes, and so everyone's going to run to the bushes to find the Easter eggs, and there's certainly going to be some there, but you're not going to beat them to that bush. So, but there's probably one, like maybe on a branch in a tree, and that's the one you can get, And so that was very illuminating to me, is that there's more than one way to come up with something funny.
Right. And are there specialists? Are there people who are better at joke writing than pitching ideas and better than story ideas and vice versa?
Yeah. Like back in the day, we would say, are you a joke person or a story person? And that's when the writing staffs were a little bigger. And so I was probably the joke person. My partner was the story person. So they got two for the price of one. But as you mature, I've certainly moved towards the story because that's where the money is. Like the joke people, they get the credit because they say something funny and everyone laughs. But the story people, if you're hiring writers and you have 8 people you could choose, the first 7 are going to be story people and maybe 1 joke people. And now that the writing staffs are smaller, you really have to be both. So.
Well, it sounds like even at a young age, you were very savvy. I mean, you hooked up with another writer whose work I'm imagining you respected. You didn't look at it as a competition. And I think that's a great piece of advice for anyone just starting off, that you rise through the ranks together and you can help each other. It's not a basketball team against another basketball team. You can work together to make your work better.
Oh yeah, and that's actually one of the stories in the book. But that's how our partnership began. I was signed by an agent, and then he was signed by the same agent, and then we wound up teaming up so we wouldn't compete with each other.
Oh yeah, that's right. You talk about, which I thought was really smart, because if you find a like-minded person, someone with your comedic sensibility, your humor IQ, it's very rare.
Yeah, I mean, it's a marriage as well. It's rare to have a writing partner for 30 years. It's a lot of trust, and it's a lot of, you got to chill after a while. And so, most of the stuff is just not worth fighting over, in my opinion.
Right. I think that one comes to learn that jokes can be created, but it's a relationship. And if you fight over a specific joke, it would be not very intelligent. You talked earlier about a young writer who felt he was discriminated against because he wasn't getting. Do you notice that is the case with writers coming up now, where they take it to heart more easily than you might have if you were starting off?
It's so hard. So it's not fair to make generalizations based on age, but let's say you have a writing room of 10 people and you notice that the older writers or the more senior writers are talking a lot. And you may think, well, I'm a new writer. I want to prove myself. I have to speak as much as they're speaking. I have to speak. I have to open my mouth 1/10 the time, and they open their mouth 1/10 of the time. But that's just not the case, because the senior writers are not getting paid the same as the junior writers. They're getting paid a lot more. They better talk more. And so a mistake that young writers often make is like they start talking just to hear themselves talk because they feel like they haven't said anything. And then it's just like, oh yeah, now we got to listen to you because you feel like you've got to say something, and you don't have to.
Yeah. Well, how do you think writers' rooms have changed over the years? I mean, you mentioned earlier that there are fewer writers now in each rooms.
Yeah.
Are people kinder to each other when it comes to things that aren't working?
Yeah, yes. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but like, the rule coming up when I was breaking in was you can say whatever you want as long as it got a laugh. It could be awful as long as it got a laugh, because that's the job. You're a comedy writer. And if you could say something that was horrible and it didn't get a laugh, and now you're in trouble. But now you can't say anything horrible ever, even if it is funny. So you have to be more sensitive for sure.
Does that affect the finished product?
The finished product has to be more sensitive too. So that's, people are very, and we can, I'm not saying whether it's bad or good. That's just the reality of, people, not wanting to offend people and not wanting to hurt people. So, there's good in that. And there's also, bad in that. So it goes both ways.
Has that affected your enjoyment? Because you came up when it was different, like you just said.
It's hard to say. Like it was a little bit of a frat house. It's like being, and I never was in a fraternity, so I'm guessing here. But whereas like anything goes, and there were women, of course. I don't think that the women that I worked with were ever uncomfortable. At least they didn't say anything. And but I know for a fact that in other writers' rooms there were women that were uncomfortable. I never worked at any that really got so disgusting or gross or really offensive. But I've heard stories from women that have suffered through that. So,
yeah, I know a writer who wrote for Letterman, and she's written about this and talked about this publicly. She didn't feel comfortable amongst the entire male room of writers, and I imagine that has changed, and for the better, right? I mean, the comedy can only grow if it's not just a bunch of Harvard lampooners.
Yeah, I mean, you want to have. It's more diverse. There's more voices in it, and for sure, like like I said, it's not cool. Like I have daughters, so it's not cool to make women uncomfortable. But
no.
In the rooms that I was with, some of the women were the worst offenders. I mean, they were pretty. So,
do you think they were playing that role of trying to be offensive or fitting in?
I don't know. I mean, they were getting laughs, so I don't know. And they were funny, so it wasn't like there wasn't pity laughs. It was we were all enjoying ourselves.
You had a really great post earlier today, and you were talking about one of my favorite writers, David Sedaris, and also inspiration that young writers have going into their careers. Can you talk about that a little bit? I just found that fascinating.
I struggled with this. Like I've read everything if he'll write a menu, and I'll read the menu. That's a great menu. I love his writing, and it's like I want to. When I first started writing personal essays, it was because he wrote them so beautifully, and I was like, what would it be like if I did? What's my version of that? And then I started. The funny thing is, I think I was introduced to him in like 2007, and I would listen to his audiobooks in the car, and that was a fun experience. And then, but it was only like 5 years ago that I started seriously considering writing them. So I ordered all his paperbacks and started reading them. And I remember, and I was like, how hard can this be? I'm a TV writer. I can do it. And then I don't remember which book I read first, but I got about, it was about halfway through the first story of this first book that I just randomly purchased. And I'm like, where is he going with this? I don't get it. And then I get to the end of the story, and I was like, oh my God, this is so good. I almost threw the book across the room. I was like, this is going to be way harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And I studied him. Like I read all his books once just for enjoyment, and then 2 or 3 times to study it. I was like, let's get behind the scenes. And then he was on Masterclass. I watched that twice, and like, let's teach me how to do. Like I had all the questions I wanted to ask him, he did not address. Although I found it incredibly entertaining. He didn't answer the question. He didn't answer the things I wanted to know. But so I studied him the way I would study a script, a TV script. And the weird thing is, as a TV writer, I don't have a voice. My job is to capture the voice of the show or the voice of the characters. But it doesn't matter what my voice is. But then when I was starting to write these my book, I was like, yeah, I had to find my voice, and I'm a good mimic. So I would read David's work and all of it, and I'm trying to get behind it, trying to figure out how he tells a story. What are the patterns that he uses? I'm not sure if I ever cracked that code, but when I first started writing these stories, I was writing in his voice, and I didn't realize it. But then when I reread these, I'd write a couple pieces, then I put them aside for a couple months and read it with fresh eyes, and it just felt like I was a cheap knockoff. I was like an imitation and a bad imitation, and it was so depressing. I was like, wow, here's this guy I admire so much. I want to write just like him, and I never will be able to.
But that's being too hard on yourself. I mean, you're coming at it as somewhat of a newbie, even though you're a professional writer. What David does, it's really astonishing. I mean, it's like opening up a handmade watch and seeing the parts. I mean, he's not just the best comedy writer or humorist out there. He's one of the best writers, period. And his control, the tools he has to do what he does is astonishing.
I've read pieces of his and thought, wow, this is the best thing I've ever read. And then I'll read something else from his, and then I'll say, no, this is the best thing I've ever read. And this is like, I could say this about a dozen of his stories, like it's that good.
He's a genius, brilliant. And I think a lot of people try to do what he does, but it's like saying, I want to play guitar like, whomever. It's your style becomes what it becomes after, his style was just what it was, and it became what it eventually became. But the pressure that people put on themselves and the pressure that agents and publishers put on people, it's always, I want you to be David Sedaris meets so-and-so, but his name is always mentioned, which I don't think is fair.
And also, I mean, he can do things now that I suspect he couldn't have done when he first started off, because he's accrued all this, capital in terms of people love him now, so he can take different chances that I imagine he couldn't have done when he was starting off.
No, and he talks about that as much, where some of the pieces he wrote in Barrel Fever, which is one of my favorite books, he considers not as finely tuned as what he later became, but that's normal. I mean, he was a guy in his 30s just starting off, and that's what happens. Everyone starts off having to learn, even a brilliant person like David Sedaris.
Yeah. It's funny because when I was looking for book cover designers, I reached out to the guy. I had Barrel Fever, and I reached out to the guy who did the book cover design of that. I didn't know him, but I just reached out on Instagram, Steve Snyder, and I told him what I wanted to do. And he goes, "Oh, well, send me your manuscript." And so I did. And he goes, "I'm retired, but I want to do it."
Wow. So, I didn't realize that. It's the same illustrator.
Well, it's not. Well, what happened was, he was such a gracious guy. Like, I didn't know the guy. And I said, listen, I don't know what my budget is. He goes, oh, I don't care. I'll do it for free. But then he wanted to, we were all set to do it. But then he was going to, he's retired. He's in his 80s, I think. And so he was going to, he had some vacations planned, and then he couldn't do it. So he referred me to one of his, acolytes, and Jenny Caro, and she did it. And she came up with a great cover. But it's all because of him that I met her. So
yeah. It's a great cover. I really love it. Let us talk about, you mentioned something that I hear often, that you have no voice in TV writing. So why do it? Is it monetary issue? Where's the joy in writing for television if most of your jokes won't get used and your sensibility and style cannot be seen in the finished product?
Well, no, it's not that my jokes won't get used or the stories won't get used. I mean, especially if I'm the showrunner.
No, but I mean, the majority, or just let's say maybe your favorite jokes aren't used, that there's someone above you choosing jokes that you might fall in love with, that if you were writing for a magazine article, you would put in, but they'd be cut for a...
Well, it's not really so much that. It's like, okay, so when you sell a show that they want. I mean, this is what they want. And they want the certain tone, and it's not like, I've had ideas for shows that I wanted to sell, but I know there's no market for it, so I'm not going to even waste time trying to pitch. Or if it's a show, let's say I'm King of the Hill, and I want to do a wacky idea. Well, that show had a very specific tone. Those are the characters I get to play with. Those are the tools in the toolbox, and I can't I can't do something else. It's like, this is what the show is, and this is what people want to watch, and that's fine. The appeal is, it's a good way to make a living. It's better than, laying bricks. It's, it's fun and it's creative. But at the end of the day, the studio, you could the studio will give you notes, the network will give you notes, and it's all fair because they're paying you for it. So it's not, when someone pays you to do something and they want it differently, well, that's why you're taking money. So it's not awful. It's just that, after doing it for 28 years, I really wanted to know, what would it be like to do something where no one's going to give me notes, where I don't have someone riding my back saying, do it this way or that way. Because even when you're the showrunner, when you're the boss, and I've been the boss 3 times, you're never the boss. There's still someone above you who's going to tell you what to do. It's how it always is.
Well, so let's talk about the freedom that you felt, if you did feel that, when you wrote the book. Because, sometimes too much freedom can be difficult for writers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like when I first started, I started writing. I'm like, am I doing this right? Is this good? I don't know. And it was kind of like my analogy is, it was like being a racehorse where, you're running in a circle. You got a jockey on your back hitting you. Go faster, go faster. And at one point, you're the horse and you're saying, I could probably run a lot faster if there wasn't an asshole on my back hitting me all the time. Yeah. So that's what it was. So I now I didn't have a jockey and I'm running in any direction I want to go. And it felt really scary. It was like, but am I doing it right?
Yeah.
But then at some point you're like, I think I'm doing it. I think I am doing it right.
Well, as a kid, I wanted to be a pilot. So I used to read up about pilots, and they would talk about when you worked for commercial airlines, you always have a boss, and how you have to appease the people in the back and the people above you. But when you fly alone on weekends, there's a freedom that you feel that you can't, that they didn't when they fly commercial, but they can't make a living just flying around in loop-de-loops. And for some reason, I always think of that when it comes to television writing versus writing for books. I can't make a living writing at books. I have to have a dual track where I have to make a living as an editor. But I'd imagine that to go from that world into a world where you now can write whatever you want must have been a nice feeling for you.
It was. I really felt like I feel like with this book, it's my best writing, I feel like. And I've written on some really good shows, but it's because of, the way I can write. The problem is, like you're saying, there's not a lot of demand for books. So
yeah. It's also a very vulnerable position to put yourself in. When you're a part of a show, you're a part of a writing team. When you wrote this book, this is your name on it. And good or bad, you're going to be taking the brunt of it.
Yeah. If you like it, it's me. If you don't, it's all me. So there's definitely that there for sure. You worry a little bit about being judged, but creatively, it was a lot more satisfying than any of the pilots or shows I've done.
Let's talk about the publishing of it. Can you talk about your attempt to find an agent, if there was an attempt, and how you might have circumvented that?
Well, yeah. So that was a whole, you were very helpful because, I reached out to you, I think it was on Twitter, and because I don't know anything about publishing. I really didn't. I had, when I first started writing this book, I had some friends who knew a little bit more than I did, but will tell you they knew nothing as well. But when I first told them what I wanted to do, I want to write a book like David Sedaris. They were like saying, yeah, there's no one's going to want that book, because there's just no demand for that. I was like, yeah, sure they will. As long as it's good, they'll like it. That was my thinking. Anyway, so I'm repped at a very big talent agency for TV and for film. And so when I first started writing this book, I reached out to my agent and I said, hey, do we have a literary department? I didn't even know, right? He goes, yeah, we're very big in literature. We got a guy in New York. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I said, can I, talk to him? Can I find out, can I bounce this off of him? And they said, yeah. So I'm pretty sure the guy had to take my meeting because I'm a client, but he didn't have to rep me because, they don't have to do anything. Out of courtesy, they got to take a phone call. So I got on the phone and I told him what I was doing. He said, yeah, great. Send me some stories. And so at the time I probably had 6 or 7 and I sent 3. And then I didn't hear anything for months and months and months. But I'm like, who cares? I'm writing it anyway. So I just kept on writing. I'm honestly, I put the agent completely out of my head. I just wanted to write the book. And then after maybe 6 months or 8 months, he wrote back, "This is great. Let's do this." I'm like, "All right, what's the plan?" "Well, we'll shop it." I'm like, "Okay." I don't know how it works. So he reached out to about 20 publishers, and then 6 wrote back. 6 seemed like they were interested. And the note I got from every one of those 6 was, and even for the ones that weren't interested, platform drives acquisition in the personal essay space.
Oh, I just hate that.
And I said, "What does that mean?" "Well, you need a social media following." I go, "Why?" "Well, that's how you're going to market the book." "Well, aren't they going to market the book?" "No, they don't do that." "What do they do then?" "Well, they'll get you a cover and they'll get you an editor." What else? What else do they do? That's about it. So, they'll get you in bookstores, and I was like, but does people go to bookstores anymore? Not really. They go to Amazon. I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, what's the whole point of all this anyway? So that was the beginning of, it was so interesting because I was convinced that if the book was well written, I don't know, I'm as naive as anybody else, but I just thought as long as the book is well written, like maybe exceptions will be made for me. And that's not the case at all.
It's a crazy world. And the fact that you came in from an outsider and could say, this is kind of doesn't make sense, I love, because it doesn't make sense. There are certain things you hear across the board when it comes to especially humor essays. And it's a few things. One, they have to be linked. And even if it's fiction,
Yes.
they have to be linked. Two,
Yes.
you have to have a social platform. And it's really true. The marketing staff does absolutely nothing. And I know this from having been on the opposite side for years and working at Vanity Fair. We would always receive books that were not appropriate at all for Vanity Fair. And what would happen was the interns would then sell them online or as the Strand. So not only are you not helping yourself, but you're hurting yourself because your books end up being sold for cheaper. You get none of the money and it comes out before the publication date. So the marketing staff really doesn't know how to sell a book. Only when you've been through it as a writer and even more so as an editor do you see what works and doesn't work. But they insist on saying the same thing across the board. In my viewpoint, in my personal opinion, to have 5,000 followers versus 10,000 followers is not going to make a big difference. And to not publish a book until you get those 10,000, I think is a total waste of time.
I was told the same thing as well, that if you're writing essays, they have to be linked somehow with a giant theme and serialized. So one follows the next. And a friend of mine told me that. I said, but I don't want to write that way. And that's not how David Sedaris does it. I want to do what he's doing. Yeah, but you're not him. That's that. But I don't want to write. I don't want him to be linked. I intentionally did not, so, that's how it is. But it's a business. Publishing is as much a business as Hollywood is. There's very little difference.
Right. But that's based on 20th century platforms. I mean, to have it, your stories are linked. You know why? Because you're the author of the piece, same themes. You're the character in most of the stories. Yeah. That's how they're linked. And to go about linking them, the reader can tell if you go back and just do something because you've been told to do it. But the fact of the matter is you end up with a product you don't like, and that doesn't sell any more than it would have otherwise. So I've seen that across the board.
How much control do they have over the cover when publishers?
Well, yeah, that's why you have to put into your contract. That's one. Listen, I don't make much money doing what I do, but it all comes down to control. And I can assure you, especially when it comes to comedy books, what they have in mind is not what you have in mind. Their comedic sensibility does not match ours. I mean, they are, morning zoo type people, and we're probably listening to alternative radio. I mean, our sensibilities do not match. So what they're doing, especially for a satire or a parody, I want it to look as accurate as it would to the original product that you're satirizing. They don't. They want it to be wacky. They want it to stand out. The thing is, though, the people we're appealing to aren't the people who are shopping in Barnes and Noble. We're appealing to the comedy geeks, friends of friends, people in the business who can tell other people, this is a book that I respect comedically. This is not a book someone's going to stumble across in the bookstore in the airport. So whenever I do, and I really don't anymore, I self-publish. But I always had final say on covers because the last thing I want is, a pair of chattering teeth on a stand-up stool with a glass of water next to it. That is not what I
There must have
want in
been
a book.
some limit to that. They might, because they could easily come back and say, "Listen, we've given you 4 covers. You're going to have to choose one of them."
Too bad. And you know what? If worse comes to worse, and I've done this, I spend $2,000 and I get it done myself. You hire your own person. This is what I want.
Right, but then they still have to approve that, right?
They do. There's always bullshit. I mean, they'll always come back with, "Oh, the marketing staff wants it to be red." Really?
Yeah.
Why? Well, red sells better. Does it? Who the fuck's the marketing staff? I don't know who these people are. And then it ends up not selling anyway. Then you're stuck with a product you don't want.
Yes.
The problem I see, and this is what I really admire about you, you did it, you put it out there. I hear from so many people who have been swirling the drain for years trying to sell a book. And the problem is they're always being told what not to do, and they're always being given advice on how they should change it. So the problem is they change the book, it becomes what they're not happy with, and it still doesn't sell.
Yeah.
So we're in a world now where you can put it out, design it, edit it, market it yourself. That has never existed in the history of publishing, that you can do it and be as effective, more effective than Random House. You just have to write the book and put time into it, which you did, which is what I love.
Yeah, I hear you 100%, and I was getting advice. People are saying to me, "You can make this YA, or can you make this a?"
Oh God, that's another fucking thing. YA, everything has to be YA.
Like, I don't want to do that. And the funny thing, the whole point of writing this was because I didn't want to get the notes. So, I'm not getting lured into your stupidity. For very little money, I'm not going to sell. Like, the whole point is I don't want to sell out. I wanted to do something creative.
Right. And the problem is a lot of young readers would buy into that. You have experience to know sometimes you can say no. But that YA thing is a major problem because I've been told numerous times you should really turn this into a YA thing. If I wanted it to be a YA, I would have fucking wrote it as a YA. It's not YA. Right. It's for adults. I don't want it to be for YA people, for kids. This is for adults. But they're basing this off of pure numbers. And the thing with these books is if you're not going to make much money, you might as well have something that is tangible on your bookshelf that you're happy with, because otherwise to put out a book you're not happy with and to not make money is hell. There's no reason to.
It's a lot of work.
So much work. Jesus. And now, how much work goes into this stuff. Tremendous amount of work. And so to have a product that you're not happy with, that you wouldn't want to show people or send to people, I think is a real shame. And there's no reason for young writers to put up with that anymore.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's interesting. I could talk forever about this. Self-publishing is a boom. There's a lot of people who are doing it, or indie publishing. There's a lot of people who are doing it. And so the barrier to entry, again, is low, but some people are just cranking it out and some people are really good. And so it does, you do have a little bit of a stigma because you don't know who's who. It could be either one, But then again, it could go, it still works that way for publishing, because if you're a famous actor or an athlete and you put out a book, it doesn't really matter if the book is good or not. The fact is people are going to buy it. That's the important thing, So even publishing is not a mark of quality. It's just a mark of, I guess it's just a kind of acceptance. That's all.
Right. And, putting out a book, being told no, I think for a book from people who don't have a great sense of humor is not a barrier that should stop people. I think you have to go full steam ahead and basically do it as like a garage rock record. Just put it out yourself, do it, and move on. Because if you stagnate, 20 years will pass and you're still trying to pitch the same damn book. There's nothing to be gained from that.
Oh, you know what? That was part of the other thing is, my parents are getting up there, and I wanted them to read the book. I wanted them to learn. I wanted them to learn about their son, because they're just true stories, they're personal essays. And I thought, wow, what a waste! How horrible would have been if they die before they got to read it. I would feel the same way about my kids if I never got the chance. And so I didn't want to wait. I was tired of waiting. There's so much about, there's so much waiting in the publishing game. It's like,
Oh, it's ridiculous. All right. So you heard back from publishers, and what did they say you needed to do in order to bring it forward beyond the linking and everything else? Was there anyone who basically said, this is good to go, let's do it?
Well, they didn't talk about linking. That I heard from a friend of mine. None of the publishers said that, but they did say that they needed a social media platform. And I said, well, how many? And no one could give me a number. No one would go on the record with a number. One said, this is exactly the we just bought a book like this, so I can't buy this. And another said, if this guy had a social media following, do you have someone just like this who has a following? It's like, what? Oh God. And so I put together a following, but at that point, it took me another year and a half before I felt I had numbers that would move the needle, even though I don't know what they wouldn't tell me what the numbers were. But I also felt, there's a million reasons. Having done this enough in Hollywood, I also recognize getting a no is way easier than getting a yes. So most people say no. And once I started hearing no from people, I knew I had to just do it myself, because they all think alike, and no one's going to stick their neck out in the line for you. That would be crazy. Why would someone do that? Like they'd lose their job. And so a lot of it was like, I guess how it works. And I didn't know this, but I was being read by junior, I guess, acquisition editors, I guess.
Yes.
And the point would be, if they liked it, they would present it to their boss, who would probably say no, right?
Yep,
so
exactly.
So I'm trying to convince these junior people, and if you have to convince them, the answer is no. The boss is going to say no, and then they don't want to lose their job, so they're not going to push their boss. That'd be crazy. And so I've just done enough in Hollywood to get a sense of when it's time to move on and just do it yourself.
So how was that process?
I talked to my friend John Altschuler, who co-created Silicon Valley, and he wrote Blaze of Glory, and he ran King of the Hill. And I told him what I was working on. And he said, Michael, why would anyone go into a bookstore and pull your book off the shelf if it's a collection of true stories? Like, who are you that they would pull that book off the shelf? And I said, you're exactly right. Who am I? And so then it was about building the audience. People need to know who I am. So I started posting every day on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, and just posting to build my audience, so that when the book was out, hopefully, a large percentage or even a small percentage would buy the book. And so that was the plan. But at that point, I kept on thinking, okay, so what do I need the publishers for?
No, you don't.
Remind me what they do then?
You don't.
No.
But the irony is, people are coming to you for advice on TV writing, not book writing. So you're building an audience for books that is associated with TV writing.
Well, and that's another thing that I had to make that bridge. So because my book is not a how to become a screenwriter book. So but that's the advice I give on, social media. So I gave a lot of thought over how I was going to do this. So I had it came down to two things. I wanted to prove to everyone who was following me that I knew how to write. And so by talking about giving examples of writing, okay, maybe they think, oh, okay, maybe this guy knows how to write, but I haven't proven it yet. But at least I'm coming from a position of authority, I guess. And the other thing was to make sure that I do it in an entertaining way. And sometimes I just post clips that are just funny, just to hopefully convince people that I know how to do this. So there's a lot of thought goes into posting every day. When I post, there's a lot of thought, way too much thought.
Yeah. And that's another thing people don't realize before they put out a book, is just how much work goes into marketing a book.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the bummer now, is I'm spending a lot of time marketing it. And when I really want to start writing the next book, but in order to make this one a success, I do have to focus on, getting it out there.
Absolutely. I mean, that is your job after it comes out, for at least a couple months, to get it into as many hands, the right hands, as you can. But that's an advantage for you too, because you're in the industry and a lot of brilliant comedic minds. So for them to read it and put out the word that is good, that is really the most effective way to market any book.
Yeah, but getting them to talk about it is a different, you'd be surprised. Like, it's not like I think Mark Maron may have mentioned my book on his podcast. Someone said that he did, but I'm not really sure if he did or not. I didn't listen, but and he wrote a blurb, so I'm forever grateful just for him for doing that. But it's not like if I were to reach out to other, it's not like, okay, so I know David Spade. It's not like David Spade's going to have me on his podcast as a favor. Like, he needs to have high profile people on his podcast, so it's not like I can count on any one person to make my day. I really have to do it myself.
But he wouldn't have to. And that's really where the social platform comes in. I mean, one mention by David Spade would be worth more than any amount of advertising in any magazine or newspaper.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So maybe he'll give me a shout out. I don't know. Probably not.
But it doesn't take much. I mean, it just takes one mensch just to go on there and say, hey, this book is great. I loved it. You'll like it too. Think about buying it.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about your next book already. I love it. Would this be fiction as well?
It'd be the same kind of book. I already have I'm already working on stories, and I mean, to me, like I said, it's the creativity of it. It's like, if I'm writing my best stuff, why not just keep on writing and hopefully I'll find an audience. And I will tour a little bit because I perform it as a show, so I will continue doing that a little bit for sure.
The book reminded me of Neil Simon is mentioned in the description, but I got more of a Gene Shepherd, who I'm a huge fan of.
Really?
Very much a sense of decency, never mocking, but dealing with some pretty dark issues.
Yeah, and that's something, and I may have picked that up from David Sedaris, honestly. I think what he does is, I think I heard him say something about, like, because these are his stories, and if he's talking about someone else, they're not there to defend themselves, and so it's a little unfair to pick on someone when they're not given the chance to get their version out there, and which is definitely true. But also, I didn't want to make myself the hero, like I'm some fantastic guy, the hero of all my stories. Like, to be honest, when you write, yeah, well, you don't, right? When you write any character, you always want to write about their weaknesses, not their strengths, and that's the part that inspires people. And so that's how I began. Every story was like, okay, I had a list of weaknesses. And then I figured out, okay, this story I'm going to concentrate on this weakness.
Right. And you always hear about likability. To me, likability comes through honesty. And you do some things in a book that, maybe you wouldn't have certainly done if you had to do it again, but you're so honest about it that you just become a fully realized character, which is, I think, the audience appreciate. They don't want to be lied to with fake niceness.
Yeah. I had read some books from TV writers, and they wrote similar, collections. And to me, my concern, my complaint with some of them was, like, it just felt like they took the network notes. Mm-hmm. So when you work on a network show, what the notes are going to be if you work on a network show for too long. Like, if you move to cable, you'll grow a little bit as a writer. And so I didn't want to put out a book that felt like I had taken the notes.
Yeah, no, you pulled it off. I mean, I can't recommend it highly enough. The book is called A Paper Orchestra, True Stories. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you. This is an honor, really.
In the mid-2000s, my producer, the best producer in the world, Rob Schulte, met Tara Avery at Astro Kitty Comics in Lawrence, Kansas. They quickly bonded over their love of graphic novels. Tara now lives in Palm Springs and operates Stacked Deck Press, which is an independent publisher focused on cultivating diversity and excellence in the LGBTQ AIU comics publishing industry. Tara introduced Rob to the French cartoonist Swazak Joffrey, who has written and drawn a graphic novel called A Good Sport. A Good Sport is a memoir detailing her participation, this will be Swazak's participation in the 2018 Gay Games, and her lifelong love of athletics, as well as her personal search for freedom. Now, this book, A Good Sport, has a Zoop campaign. And now Zoop is like Kickstarter, but for graphic novels. And you can find the campaign for this specific book linked in our show notes, but I'll also tell you the address right now. It's zoop, zoop.gg/C, just the letter C, /A Good Sport. And that's one word, AGOODSPORT. Here is that interview.
So I'm really excited that you could take the time to speak with me today, Swazik and Tara. I was recently given a PDF version of A Good Sport, and I am really, really enjoying it so far. It is a fun read, a colorful read, a very exciting story, and I think let's just start at the very basics. Swaz, what inspired A Good Sport?
Well, I wanted to make a book about the gay games. Just in case you don't know what the gay games are, they were founded by Dr. Tom Weddle, an Olympic athlete. And the first edition of the gay games was first held in San Francisco in 1982. And so the mission of the games is to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion through sport and culture. My experience of the Paris Gay Games 10 in 2018 was extremely positive and emotional. I wanted to take part because I love San Francisco, and the games were taking place in my native country, so I had to join. And I discovered the true meaning of the games, which was to create bridges. It's all about the people you meet and the friendships. It was a very positive event. It is really a celebration of health and life. My book is about self-discovery. I had no idea. Working on the book, I realized, it was actually turning into a very personal memoir about sports and about my personal quest for freedom.
Was there a moment when you were writing it, creating it, that it did spark, like, this is more than my story?
First, it was my story, me taking part in this big event. Very true. But when I was taking part in the games, I had I didn't think I would make a book out of it, to be honest. This came 5 years later to 4 years later. I actually had coffee with Tara in California in July 2022. And I told her, I think I have an idea for a book. So it was 4 years later. And when I started working on the book, writing, I was actually writing about the big story and my very humble participation into those games. And I thought it would be just a documentary type story and that everybody would get to learn about the gay games reading a comic book. And as I worked on the comic book, I actually, really changed my perspective and started writing. I actually have 10 chapters in the book because it's really all about bowling.
Uh-huh.
You have 10 games in a bowling game, and each chapter tells the story, the experience from a very different angle. So you have chapters that are very much historical, very much documentary, very much personal, but for other people than people from Uganda who took part in the games, and also this guy. He was the first French person that took part in the gay games back in 1982. So I tell his story using first person. And then there is my personal story, but I go back all the way to my childhood.
What I'd like to make an observation of the book too is that it's like sort of Swaz's life and Swaz's perspective ties it together. There's content in the book that's about the history of the gay games. There's content in the book about her formative experiences with athletics and all sorts of stuff. But like the through line is sort of her, personal quest for freedom and the role athletic played in that. And I think that one of the draws of the books to people is sort of the wisdom contained in it. Personal lessons, without being preachy, are very edifying for the reader.
Tara, I wanted to ask you, what was that meeting like with Swaz when this idea was presented to you? Like, what was your perspective on it just from an inception point?
Well, I had published one of Swaz's stories in an anthology several years before, Alphabet, one of the very first things I published. This is from 2016. And her style, her drawing style was one of the more distinctive drawing styles that we included in that book, in a book of 370 something pages with 40 different creators, hers was one of the more memorable visual contributions. And I thought, she wants to do a whole book. Well, okay, that sounds good to me. Because it was one of the pull images that we used, pull images from her work whenever we did any promotion for Alphabet. So, and she described it, and it seemed perfectly in sync with the quote mission unquote of Stack Deck Press, to sort of get queer experience on the comics page and in ways that everybody can draw something from, and it's just a hell of a fascinating story. I mean, Swaz has done a lot of things. She's been a lot of places, and I think if just the reading alone is fascinating, but I think we all can benefit from the experiences of others who have been all over the globe, participating in all kinds of activist work and just learning about other people.
Yeah, I think that one thing I will misaccredit this quote, but something that's always stuck with me is the fact that, like, you only have your life, right? And so if you only live in your life, you only know your experience. Yes. And so being able to, like, have different stories like Swaz's or anyone else from any sort of perspective, like, if you're not reading stories or listening to people who have lived a different walk of life from you, whether positive, negative, whatever, you wouldn't have that experience. And I think being able to offer this story to many, many people out there is a net positive, and hell, maybe some more people participating in the gay games coming up.
Yeah. It's about empathy, and it's about sharing.
Mm-hmm.
But more selfishly, it's also about self-discovery.
Yeah.
When you meet people, you see things from a different angle, but you also find out who you truly are, who you are. I mean, and you discover that person, and you create that life day after day. So I think even selfishly, you want to learn about other people, and share about other people, because this is how you grow.
Yeah, I mean, what's good for people is good for people. That's like a motto I like to live by. And so, like, if it's going to be good for me, I mean, it can't be all that bad, right? Like, it's one of those things. Self-discovery is growth, is helping. And, I want to take it back a little bit to, something that really jumped out at me is your illustration style, your drawing style, your colorfulness, like the way you present thematically on the page, as well as how Tara was just talking about how it really pops. And there's so much about athletics and sports in this memoir, but when did you start drawing and writing? Is that has that always been since your childhood? Is it something you discovered later? Yeah.
No, it's always been growing up. I think my main influence, I would say, has been my mother, who really taught us to be creative and play with our intelligence. My three brothers and I, the four of us would, draw all the time. We were all really good artists as kids. I'm the only one who is actually making comics now as an adult, really, making art. But our favorite game was to make pictures, make fanzines, books, and make up board games, role games. So we were very productive.
Yeah.
But also, I think the reason why I started making comics, though, is because I was born in Angoulême. Angoulême is a small town in the southwest of France. And in the late 70s, when I was born, they created and launched the International Comic Con. I don't know if you've heard. I mean, you should know.
Yeah.
The Festival International de la Bande Dessinée. It's a major international event. And it's huge now. At the time, it was only the beginning. And growing up, the school would take us to the comics center, and they would make us draw comics. So the festival takes place every year in late January. And this year, Tara made the trip to Angoulême. She was with me. And so I think that played a major part.
Yeah.
I made comics. I made comics as a kid and for a long time. And then I stopped entirely. I was very self-conscious about my art when I was a teenager. And then I went to university, and I did other things. And and I really started making comics again in my 30s. So now I have embraced that unique medium to tell stories, because it's really the thrill. I like to draw, but it's really about telling stories, which I really had to work on, because I'm a natural for drawing. I'm a natural for visuals, but working on a story is different, and I'm self-taught, and I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
That's 100% what it should be, right? It's not forceful. It's something.
It's a passion.
It's a passion. It's something you wanted to do. You went out there. You did it. Now, Tara, on your side of things, why comics for you? We've candidly, for the audience, Tara and I have known each other going back almost 20 years now, but there's been some time in between. We both moved across the country, but we met via comics.
Yeah.
And why comics for you in the most broad sense of it?
Because I can do it all by myself, and I don't need to deal with anybody else's nonsense when I'm making a comic.
Yeah, well,
that's
fair.
probably that. And of course, having read comics from a very young age, it was like, you start reading. It was Cat in the Hat. We were supposed to move probably into, like prosy stuff, but I got a bunch of hand-me-down comics from my brother, and then it was all over. So yeah, Fantastic Four and Legion of Superheroes and other nonsense. And then later on, Peanuts and Mad Magazine, and suddenly your French fried brain is hungry for comics all the time. And
tell me about it.
And I know, like, I think a lot of people who are roughly my age, I was born in 70, who are comics people, in the 80s, Love and Rockets kind of, quote, changed my life, unquote, the usual. You hear a lot about people my age who are in indie comics. That's a common refrain. And then that led me to explore more of comics history and other sorts of comics, seeking out, underground comics, American newspaper comics, European comics, just anything that, was sort of, that could give me a new perspective. They can give me a new perspective on the medium itself. I mean, superhero comics are great, but if that's all you read, you get a really weird idea what comics are about. That was it. And then, like, we met through comics and in our years in Lawrence, in the mid-aughts, there was a group of people there. We, kind of collaborated, published some things, and most of us went our separate ways. And when I made it to California, I got involved in with Prism, which is a nonprofit organization. That's Prism with an M, by the way, not with an N.
Yeah.
So it's an organization that supports and promotes LGBTQ comics creators and comics fans throughout the United States. And in 2015, Prism wanted to do a book to celebrate 10 years of a grant that they had been administering for queer creators. The publisher who was going to publish that particular book for them fell off the project. And I said, I'll start a publishing company. And that's how I backed into publishing comics.
I know that feeling. I have stumbled into more successful things than anything I planned on being successful.
Oh, yeah.
Swaz, you touched on this a little bit, but were there any early influences for you when it came to drawing styles, cartooning, things that you watched that you emulated at first that has helped evolve your creative endeavors?
It's hard to say. I don't know if I have any artist that really influenced me. There is no artist that I look up to. I mean, just one person. I look up to people, of course, who are, major artists, but I can't really see myself in what they do. I can only admire what they produce.
Yeah.
But it's more like inspiration. It's inspirational for me. It sounds pretentious, but I will always prefer my work because it's mine. It's my voice. You know what I mean? It's my thing.
Yeah.
I know it's not as good. It may not be as good. It's not the point. What I love is my stuff. But as a kid, the French artist, woman artist, Claire Bretéchet, was a major influence. I loved her work. It's very smart. She was brilliant, but it's not at all the type of comics I make. But I have to confess, I did imitate her as a kid. But she was an inspiration because she did good stuff. also she was a woman, so I think I identified and thought, I can do it. You know how it is. So, and she, like I said the other day, we had a round table in Angoulême, and Justin Hall was there, Tara was there, Karen Green of Columbia University was there, and I said, she died, Claire Boitochet died 2 years ago, and I cried. So it must, she must have been important.
Yeah.
And then along the years, I don't know maybe Daniel Klaus, of course, I saw his work and I was like, whoa, this is different. This is, strange in a good way. And I looked at his pages, and I think I did not imitate his pages. There is nothing the layout. I just, I'm self-taught, so I lack self-confidence. I have been lacking self-confidence for a long time. Now I have come to understand that there's no recipe, and I just need to do my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I did look for a long time. I did look at other people's work in order to see how they worked things out. But at the end of the day, you have to do your own thing.
Yeah, you weren't alone, but you didn't want to mimic, and that what actually ended up...
I can't.
Yeah,
I can't.
What ended up coming out was true to your own form. And, a lot of times my buddy Mike Sachs will talk about how impressed he is by like the punk rock aesthetic. The feeling it's like, you know what? I'm not going to play by your rules. This is something I want to make, and I'm going to fucking make it, right? I am going to put it up because I am that passionate about it. And if it sells, great. But that's not the point. The point is to do something that I want to do on my terms and in a way that is creatively fulfilling for me. And I'm totally getting that from both of you here. And I got to say, like, additionally, it's inspiring because I've also been in a place like that. I work in audio, and I will, look to others like, how did you do it? And then realize like, well, that's not the way I want to do it. And I think a lot of creators out there forget sometimes you don't have to be a copier. You don't have to be a mimicker, but you can see how people have put tent poles down to create their things. And those tent poles can influence your creation without having to carbon copy, do anything.
You always imitate unconsciously, but you don't have to think that you need to go to school and reproduce something. But I think creativity is about imitating. Like when you were in school, when you were a kid, you do repeat, copy and paste. But then you have to transform that into something else. And I think you have to trust yourself that you will actually come up with something new. But there is nothing. There is no such thing as something new. It will be I like to use the image of quilt making when it comes to my work, because you take bits and pieces, right, that belong to everyone else. It's more or less conscious. You are more or less aware, and you don't choose the pieces, and you sew them together, and blah. You have something new, but it's not. It's out of old stuff.
Another thing is a lot of the cartoonists that make the biggest impact are people that we would say are self-taught, or they're not typically graduates of art schools or trade schools. There are quite a few great cartoonists who have done that, but there's a high percentage of people who have their own way. They go through drawing the influences that are important to them, that help them tell the stories they want, using the stylistic cues that appeal to them. And there's also something to be said for you make your own mistakes and you find your own way, and that's how the art progresses. If there were one way to do things and everybody had to learn it and stick to that forever and ever, we would still be making the same comics we made 100 years ago. And clearly we are not. No. So I think it's so important that, people, yes, there is a craft. You want to learn the craft, but you don't want to the craft is there to help you. You're not there to help the craft. And telling the story, your own story, is the most important.
And I think the risk is inhibition, because there is theory, and you can read from books or attend classes that will teach you how to make comics, and that's great. But the risk is you will never be ready. And I think you need to experiment and fail, and just like anything else.
Yeah, this leads into something I wanted to ask you both. And Swaz, we can start with you, but do you have any direct advice for young creators? This is all great, but is there something that you realize, if I would have known X sooner. It's something I would tell a young creator who might feel that they aren't able to break through or aren't able to make their own graphic novel.
Well, my first advice would be don't try anything. Don't try to break through. Just do it, you know? And also, I think most people assume comics are about illustration, and most people who make comics come from art. You know, it comes from a place of, I like making pictures. However, it's sequential art. It's a sequential art form, and so you have to focus on the storytelling as a whole. And the storytelling comes as a result of art and text combined. And personally, I was all about drawing, so I had to learn the hard way how to write first, and then I mean, I had to work on my writing skills, and still have to. And when I think about it, stories and text, more than the art itself, drew me to comics as a kid. So, although I was all about making pictures, I already knew from the start it was all about the story. So, my advice would be, you have to find your way of combining illustrations and writing in a way that's effective, but you have to try and find this unique blend. For me, you don't want your panels to be mere illustrations of your text. And your text should not be a description of what your art shows. So what you want is a combination. What you need is the perfect blend. So what I do is I write first, minimal text, enough information that cannot be conveyed visually, and more or less metaphorical text that transcribe emotions. Next, I work on my layout. I see how the text will fit. It's really all about space and how I can adjust. And, there is no recipe to making comics, as we said before. By the end of the day, you need to experiment and see what works for you. Personally, I like to have descriptive text on poetic images and lyrical text onto down-to-earth, realistic panels. I like contrast. So I write first, then I work on my storyboard, I work on my panels, on my art. But then I go back to my text, I edit, because I realize what I wanted to express could be illustrated or painted in poetic ways. And also my last advice for artists is you need to love it. You need to do what you love, and you need self-confidence. You need fun. You need to have fun, and you need friends. And if you don't have friends, you will make them along the way. And I have made many friends on social media, on Instagram, during Comic-Con, and I think that really helps being productive.
Absolutely. Tara, how about you? Anything that you can add for a young creator?
What was it Frank Miller used to say? The dirty secret of cartoonists is that they make stories about things they like to draw.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good start, because like the drawing is the most time consuming part for most people of making a comic. And it's the most technically challenging for most people. And it's, so yeah, you should probably start by what do you like to draw? Well, find some story in that. That's drawing something about your life. You like to draw yourself and the people in your life. That's great. Or if you like to draw bunnies, well, bunnies are a great start, so I think that's the truth. I think another thing that I look for is that make comics. As a publisher, people approach me and say, "Hi, I've got this great idea for a book," and they will have like, "Oh, I have character sketches. I have an outline. I have some world building details. I have all this stuff." Then I say, "Great. Do you have any comics pages?" And if they don't have comic pages, if they don't have like a chapter or two or something that I can look at and get a feel for how they actually create the comics, then there's nothing I can do with it,
Yeah.
And so I encourage people who want to make comics, make the comics, all the world building and all of the design work and all of this conceptual stuff is very helpful. But if that you don't take the next step to actually making the comics, then you're not actually making comics. That's obvious, isn't it? So I think that, for a lot of people, just at some point, stop working on the outline, stop designing characters, and get out a sheet of paper or open up a file if you're doing things digitally, and just say, I'm making the page of comics. And as Swaz said, you can't be too wrapped up in whether or not it's good enough or whether or not it conforms to the highest standards of your craft. You have to just say, it's mine, and that's and I'm going to do my best, and then I'm going to move on.
The graphic novel is a good sport, and it's fantastic. Swaz, anything you can let people know on where they can find you and your work?
Well, people can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and also check my website, swazigjeffreycomics.com. We have a Zoop page. It's zoop.gg/c/a-good-sport. You can, take part in the launch of the book coming up in early March. You can also check on the web Stack Deck Press, and you should be able to find us.
Tara, tell us a little bit about Stack Deck Press.
Well, Stack Deck Press, we've been around for 9+ years now. We're going. And in addition to a good sport, which, as Swaz mentioned, Zoop campaign starts early March. Please go to the Zoop site and put your email in for updates. Beyond that, another book that we released, this past weekend, we had a launch for We Belong, which is an all Black, all queer sci-fi fantasy comics anthology. And we're pleased to report that at Pride and Panels in San Francisco, we had a very strong launch. There's very positive reception to it. So it's going to be going into fulfillment very soon. The printer should be kicking out the remainder of the print run, and it should be available to people either through the Stack Deck Press website or through comic book outlets that are served by distributors such as Microcosm and Emerald Distribution. It's the brainchild of editors William O. Tyler and Victor Kearney, and I gave them the reins to say that you're Black folks, and this is a Black book, so you have all the creative control. I'm going to be here to add my advice, but I'm not going to be the one making major creative decisions. And so it's turned out well, because we seem to have had a really strong reception this past weekend. So of course, there's also a good sport, which we're very excited about, and I think it's as strong a book as any we've published so far. And there's more to come. We have other projects in the queue, but it's a little too early to make news on them until we have a little more nailed down. So,
well, that's incredible. I'm so happy we were all able to take the time to talk today, and I cannot wait to see what else is coming down the pike. Thank you, Swaz. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you for having us.
That's it for this episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. I'd like to thank you for doing it with me, and I'd like to thank you for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. I really do. I'd like to thank Sonar for giving me this opportunity, and I'd like to thank the following for helping me to make this episode possible. Rob Schulte, the world's greatest producer, and that ain't no lie. Michael Jamin, whose new book, A Paper Orchestra, can be found on Amazon and on other sites. Go to michaeljamin.com for more information. That's Michael, Jamin.com, all one word. And you can find videos and links to his social sites. I recommend strongly you follow Michael. He is a fantastic social media producer. He produces a ton of things, including great videos every day. He's on it. And if you want to get into writing, comedy writing, specifically writing for television, I can think of no better place to go. So that's michaeljamin.com. I'd like to thank Tara Avery and cartoonist Swazak Joffrey. Their new graphic novel is called A Good Sport, and you can support them at Zoop. I recommend that you do so. So until next episode, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for my junk. Jack!
I have been to restaurants in Soho whose denizens have crossed social and geographical barriers to reach them. In one, I have seen a girl sitting amid musical pandemonium with a book open on her knees and her little finger entwined with that of her true love. Of course, she was not really listening, not really reading, and not communicating with her friend in any way that required effort or style. It would be hard to say whether the jukebox caused the death of human speech or whether music came to fill an already widening void. But unless the music is stopped now, the human race, mumbling, snapping its fingers and twitching its hips, will sink back into an amoebic state where it will take a coagulation of hundreds of teenagers to make up a single unit of vital force, which, once formed, will only live on sedatives, consume itself on the terraces of football stadia, and die.
これでクリーニングは終了しました。ディスクはサウンド終了後、自動的に停止します。Cleaning has been completed. The disc will stop automatically when the sound finishes.